The water of Lake Michigan was a murky, unforgiving green. For Leo Martinez, it was a second home. For his partner, Sam Jones, it was just cold. They were shipwreck hunters, a two-man operation with a rusty boat named the Wreck Finder and sonar equipment that was at least a decade past its prime. For weeks, they had been scanning a grid off the coast of Wisconsin, chasing rumors of a lost 19th century schooner, the Northwind, which was said to have gone down with a cargo of gold. Anything? Leo's voice crackled through Sam's headset, a welcome distraction from the rhythmic ping of the sonar. Just mud and more mud, Sam replied, hunched over the glowing screen in the cramped cabin, and maybe a suspiciously large rock. You sure about these coordinates, Leo? The old-timer at the docks swore by them, Leo said, his voice laced with the unshakable optimism that made him both a great partner and an occasional pain. Sam was about to make a sarcastic comment about grandfathers and ghost stories when something flickered on the sonar display. It wasn't the sharp, chaotic signature of a shipwreck. It was clean. Too clean. A perfect right angle. He adjusted the gain, sharpening the image. The right angle was part of a larger shape, a long straight line that ran for several hundred feet before disappearing off the edge of their scanning grid. Leo, Sam said, his voice suddenly serious. I've got a structure on the sonar, and it's not a shipwreck. Leo's head appeared in the cabin doorway, his wetsuit dripping onto the floor. He peered at the screen, his brow furrowed. What the hell is that? A pipeline? No pipeline on any chart out here, Sam said, running a finger along the glowing line. And look at this. He pointed to where another line intersected the first, again, at a perfect 90-degree angle. It looks like the corner of a building or a wall. They spent the next hour making slow, deliberate passes over the area. More and more lines appeared on the screen, forming a grid of impossible geometry on the lakebed. They weren't looking at a single structure. They were looking at the layout of streets, of a city block. Buried under a century of silt, in 200 feet of freezing water, was something that had no right to be there. We have to go down, Leo said, his eyes wide open, with a mixture of excitement and disbelief. We have to see it. Sam felt a knot of apprehension tighten in his stomach. The sonar screen felt like a map to a place no one was ever meant to find. I don't know, man, he hesitated. There's something about this that feels wrong. But Leo was already pulling on his dive gear, the lure of the unknown overriding any sense of caution. This is bigger than the Northwind, Sam, he said, his voice muffled by his gear. This is history. Sam sighed, knowing there was no arguing. He began his own preparations, the cold dread in his gut warring with the undeniable thrill of discovery. He just hoped that whatever history they were about to uncover had been buried for a reason. The descent was slow and the pressure mounted quickly. Visibility dropped to near zero within the first 50 feet, forcing them to rely entirely on their helmet lamps. The silence of the deep was broken only by the hiss of their regulators and the occasional bump against unseen debris. 200 feet down, the water was bitingly cold, even through their thick wetsuits. Then the silt began to thin, and the beam of Leo's light caught something solid, a wall. It rose straight up from the lakebed, impossibly smooth and dark, like a cliff face in the abyss. As they swam along its length, more features began to emerge from the gloom. Perfectly aligned blocks, doorways that led into impenetrable darkness, and strange, undecipherable symbols etched into the stone. It was undeniably a city. Streets stretched out before them, lined with buildings of unfamiliar design. There were no signs of human construction. The scale was wrong, the angles too precise, the materials unlike anything they knew. It felt ancient, alien, and utterly silent. A sudden flicker in Leo's light caught Sam's attention. He swam closer, his heart pounding. Carved into one of the massive blocks was a symbol, a circle with 3 equidistant lines radiating outwards. It was repeated several times, a silent, enigmatic signature. As they ventured deeper into the submerged metropolis, an unsettling feeling washed over Sam. It wasn't just the strangeness of the place or the crushing pressure. It was a sense of being watched. He kept glancing over his shoulder, half expecting to see something move in the periphery of his light. Suddenly, Leo stopped, his light fixed on something ahead. Sam swam up beside him, and his breath caught in his throat. Looming out of the darkness was a structure unlike any they had seen so far. It was tall and cylindrical, with dark, gaping holes that could have been windows. A faint, rhythmic pulse of light emanated from within one of the openings, like a heartbeat in the deep. A low, resonant hum vibrated through the water, just barely audible, but enough to make their teeth chatter. It seemed to be coming from the cylindrical structure. The feeling of being watched intensified, replaced by a sense of undeniable presence. They were not alone in this sunken city. The humming grew slightly louder as they approached the cylindrical structure. The pulsing light within the opening seemed to sync with the rhythm of the vibrations. Leo cautiously extended his hand, running his gloved fingers over the smooth, cold surface of the structure. It didn't feel like stone. It had a strange, almost metallic quality to it, despite its aged appearance. As he touched it, both divers experienced a sudden jolt, a faint tingling sensation that ran through their bodies. Simultaneously, fragmented images flashed through their minds, strange, slender beings moving through the city's streets, intricate devices humming with energy, and a sky filled with unfamiliar celestial bodies. The visions were fleeting and disjointed, like pieces of a forgotten dream. "Did you feel that?" Leo's voice was muffled by his regulator, but his wide eyes conveyed his shock. Sam nodded, his mind still reeling from the brief glimpse into the city's past. "It's like the city is remembering, and it's showing us." They spent the next hour exploring the immediate vicinity of the cylindrical structure. They found more of the strange symbols, and with each touch, more fragments of visions flooded their minds. They saw the beings interacting with the structures, using gestures and movements that seemed both graceful and purposeful. The technology they glimpsed was far beyond human understanding, manipulating energy in ways that defied current science. One vision was particularly vivid for Sam. He saw the city as it once was, bathed in a soft, ethereal light. The cylindrical structures hummed with energy, illuminating the streets with intricate patterns. The slender beings moved with a quiet purpose, their forms casting long shadows in the alien light. There was a sense of peace and advanced civilization, a stark contrast to the silent, decaying ruins surrounding them. But then, the visions began to shift. The ethereal light flickered and died. Shadows crept through the city, and a sense of fear and urgency permeated the fragmented memories. The slender beings looked worried, their movements becoming frantic. Sam saw flashes of what looked like energy weapons and defensive shields. The peaceful civilization was under threat. As the visions grew darker, the humming intensified again, this time with a more urgent, almost distressed tone. The pulsing light within the cylindrical structure flickered erratically. It felt as though the city itself was trying to communicate a warning, a story of a glorious past and a catastrophic end. The increasing intensity of the humming and the disturbing nature of the fragmented visions spurred Leo and Sam to move away from the cylindrical structure. They swam through the silent streets, their lights cutting through the perpetual twilight of the deep lake. The architecture continued to baffle them, massive, precisely engineered structures with no discernible purpose, connected by wide avenues now thick with silt. As they rounded a corner, Leo's light beam landed on something that made him stop dead in the water. There, in a patch of undisturbed silt on what might have once been a plaza, were footprints. They weren't human. They were elongated, with 3 distinct toes, and much larger than any foot they had ever seen. The silt had preserved them perfectly, a clear indication that whatever had made them had been here relatively recently. A chill snaked down Sam's spine. The visions were of the past, but these footprints were undeniably present. Had something or someone survived the city's demise? Or had something new found its way to this forgotten place? They followed the trail of footprints for a short distance. They led towards a large, arch-like structure that seemed to be relatively intact. As they approached the arch, they noticed more signs of recent activity. Patches of silt had been disturbed, and in one area, they found a small, smooth object made of a dark, glassy material. It was warm to the touch and emitted a faint, almost imperceptible hum of its own. "What is it?" Leo murmured, turning the object over in his gloved hand. Sam shook his head, a growing sense of unease settling over him. "I don't know, but I don't like it." As Leo held the object, a new vision flooded his mind, clearer and more sustained than the previous fragments. He saw one of the slender beings holding a similar object, using it to manipulate a glowing panel on a wall. The being seemed to be activating something, and then a flash of blinding light, followed by chaos and destruction. Leo recoiled, dropping the object as if it had burned him. "We need to get out of here," he said, his voice urgent. "Now!" The fragmented memories had been intriguing, but the fresh footprints and the ominous visions linked to the object had shifted their discovery from an archaeological marvel to a potential threat. The city beneath Lake Michigan was not just a relic of the past. It felt like something was still alive or had been awakened. And whatever it was, it might not be friendly. Their ascent felt agonizingly slow. Every passing minute, every foot gained towards the surface felt like an eternity. The eerie silence of the deep had been replaced by the frantic beating of their own hearts. When they finally broke the surface, the familiar side of their boat, the wreck finder, bobbing under the gray Wisconsin sky, was a profound relief. They clambered on board, ripping off their masks and taking deep, ragged breaths of the cool air. For a few moments, they said nothing, the adrenaline of their discovery and their hasty retreat leaving them speechless. "We have to report this," Sam said finally, his voice hoarse. "The Coast Guard, maybe? A university?" Leo was staring back at the calm surface of the lake, his expression a mixture of awe and fear. "And tell them what, Sam? That we found Atlantis with aliens in it at the bottom of Lake Michigan? They'll think we're crazy. They'll lock us up. But those footprints, that thing you found, Leo, that's not just history down there. It's active. What if it's dangerous?" Their argument was cut short by the roar of an engine. A sleek, black, unmarked helicopter was approaching their position, flying low and fast over the water. It wasn't a Coast Guard or a news hopper. It had a menacing, predatory look to it. The helicopter circled their small boat once before a voice blared from a loudspeaker, sharp and authoritarian. "This is a restricted area. Maintain your position and prepare to be boarded. Do not attempt to use any communication devices." Panic seized them. How could anyone have known they were here? They hadn't used their radio since the dive. It was as if their very presence, their disturbance of the silent city below, had triggered an alarm they couldn't hear. Before they could react, a larger vessel appeared on the horizon, cutting through the water towards them at high speed. It was a gray, unmarked patrol boat, similar in design to a naval destroyer, but flying no flag. Men in dark tactical gear stood on its deck, their faces obscured by helmets, their hands holding weapons. Leo and Sam exchanged a look of pure terror. They hadn't just discovered a lost city, they had stumbled into a secret that powerful unknown forces were determined to keep. Their little boat, the wreck finder, suddenly felt like a cage, and the vast open water of Lake Michigan a prison. Resistance was futile. The men who boarded the wreck finder moved with swift, practiced efficiency. Leo and Sam were separated, their hands roughly cuffed behind their backs.
their diving equipment, and the boat's sonar unit were quickly examined and then seemingly confiscated. No words were exchanged, only hard stares and the silent threat of the weapons they carried. They were transferred to the larger vessel, a cold, sterile environment of steel and humming machinery. They were kept apart, each confined to a small, windowless room with a single metal chair bolted to the floor. The silence here was different from the lake's abyss. It was heavy with unspoken authority and the chilling certainty of lost freedom. Hours passed in this oppressive stillness. Neither Leo nor Sam knew where they were being taken or what awaited them. The lack of information was a deliberate tactic designed to sow fear and disorientation. Finally, the door to Sam's room hissed open, and two of the armed figures entered. They didn't speak, but their gestures were clear. He was led down a narrow corridor, the only sound the echo of their boots on the metal floor. He was taken to a larger room, brightly lit and filled with sophisticated equipment. Behind a large desk sat a man in a dark suit, his face impassive, his eyes sharp and assessing. "Mr. Jones, my name is Agent Thorne. We need to talk about what you found in Lake Michigan." Sam remained silent, his heart pounding. "You stumbled upon something very sensitive, Mr. Jones, something that the public is not ready to know about, something that could cause widespread panic and destabilization." He paused, letting his words sink in. "We understand you and your partner were simply looking for a shipwreck. Perhaps you can understand that certain discoveries must remain confidential for the greater good." Thorne's words were carefully chosen, appealing to a sense of patriotism and responsibility. But Sam saw the cold calculation in his eyes. This wasn't about the greater good. It was about control, about safeguarding something far more significant than they were letting on. Meanwhile, in a similar room, Leo was facing his own interrogator. The questions were the same. What did you see? What did you touch? What do you remember? The pressure was intense, the atmosphere designed to break their resolve. As the interrogations continued, both Leo and Sam began to piece together a disturbing picture. The government, or some shadowy organization within it, had known about the city beneath Lake Michigan for a long time. Their restricted area warning wasn't a coincidence. They had likely been monitoring the lake for signs of activity, perhaps even anticipating a discovery. The fact that they were so quickly apprehended suggested a sophisticated surveillance network. It also implied that whatever was down there was considered a matter of extreme national security. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Thorne gave Sam a thin file to read. It contained heavily redacted reports, blurry sonar images that seemed to corroborate their findings, and cryptic references to Project Sub-Aqua, dating back several decades. The file painted a picture of long-term government interest in the lakebed far beyond the search for a simple shipwreck. "Mr. Jones," Thorne said when Sam had finished reading, his voice now carrying a hint of finality. "For the security of this nation, this information cannot be released. You and Mr. Martinez will be debriefed further, and then certain arrangements will be made to ensure your continued silence." The words hung in the air, heavy with unspoken implications. Sam knew they weren't being offered a consulting job.
The arrangements turned out to be less sinister than Sam had feared, but infinitely more surreal. They weren't taken to a prison, but to a secluded, comfortable-looking facility nestled in a remote forest in northern Wisconsin. It was less a holding cell and more of a gilded cage. They were given clean clothes, good food, and access to books and movies, but they were watched constantly, and every door was locked. During one of his supervised walks around the compound's small perimeter, Leo struck up a quiet conversation with one of the younger guards, a man named Peterson, who seemed less indoctrinated than the others. Feigning a casual interest in local lore, Leo asked about old stories from the Lake Michigan area. Peterson, initially hesitant, eventually relented. "There are stories," he said, his voice low, "mostly from the local Ojibwe tribe. My grandma used to tell me them." He spoke of the Nibinabe, the watermen or water spirits of the Anishinaabe tales. They were said to be powerful beings who inhabited the deepest parts of the Great Lakes. They weren't gods or demons, just different. According to the legends, they were here long before the first humans, and they kept to themselves unless disturbed. "The legends say that they are guardians," Peterson continued, glancing around nervously. "They watch over something ancient, something that fell from the sky a long, long time ago. The elders say that to disturb their city is to invite a storm, not of water, but of silence and shadow." The words sent a shiver down Leo's spine. A city of guardians, something that fell from the sky. It mirrored their discovery with terrifying accuracy. These weren't just fishermen's tales. They were cultural memories, oral histories passed down through generations, describing a reality that modern man had dismissed as myth. "The stories also say," Peterson added, his voice barely a whisper, "that the Nibinabe can speak to you without words. They can show you things, images, memories, but you have to be close to their home to hear the whispers." Leo realized with a jolt that the visions they'd experienced weren't just a property of the city's technology. It was a deliberate, biological form of communication. The beings, the Nibinabe, had been trying to speak to them. The footprints weren't a sign of aggression, but perhaps of curiosity, or even concern. An ancient guardian, woken from its slumber by their noisy sonar, had come out to investigate. The government wasn't just hiding a city. It was hiding an entire, intelligent, native species that had existed on the continent for millennia. And Agent Thorne's fear wasn't about public panic over aliens. It was the fear of revealing that this land was never truly theirs to begin with. Back in the underwater city, the disturbance caused by the divers and the subsequent heavy-handed presence of the military vessel on the surface had not been unnoticed. Deep within the central cylindrical structure, the low hum that had permeated the water began to change. It grew in pitch and intensity, resonating through the dark, silent streets. The faint lights inside the tower pulsed faster, no longer a steady heartbeat, but a frantic, arrhythmic flashing. The energy that had lain dormant for centuries, perhaps millennia, was stirring. The guardians, the Nibinabe, had been provoked. Their sanctuary had been violated, first by curious intruders, and now by a force that felt aggressive and domineering from above. On the lakebed, the three-toed footprints began to appear in greater numbers, converging on the central plaza from all directions. Shadowy, slender figures emerged from the dark doorways of the city's buildings. They moved with a slow, deliberate grace, their large, dark eyes all turned upwards towards the surface. They were gathering. Inside the main tower, the source of the city's power began to glow more brightly. A column of soft blue-white light ascended through the center of the structure, illuminating it from within like a colossal lantern. The water around the city began to warm slightly, and a gentle current started to flow through the streets, swirling the silt in hypnotic patterns. The ancient city was no longer just a passive ruin. It was becoming an active, responsive system. The guardians, the Nibinabe, were preparing for something. It wasn't an act of aggression, but one of defense. They were activating their home, preparing to shield it from the world above, to cut it off completely if necessary. The silent whispers they had sent to Leo and Sam were a gentle warning. Now, faced with a persistent, invasive presence, they were preparing to raise the storm of silence and shadow the legend spoke of. They were about to take their city and themselves out of the reach of humanity for good. Back at the secluded facility in Wisconsin, Leo and Sam watched the news with a growing sense of dread. The initial reports were vague. Seismic anomalies detected in Lake Michigan, unusual magnetic readings, and a flurry of Coast Guard and federal activity. Then came the official statements. A previously unknown underwater geological formation had been discovered, posing a potential hazard to navigation. The area was declared off-limits for public safety. Agent Thorne and Agent Davies paid them a final visit. Their demeanor was different now, a mixture of relief and grim resignation. "It seems," Thorne said, his voice low, "that the formation has stabilized. The anomalies have subsided." Davies added, "The lake is quiet again, as if nothing ever happened." They didn't need to spell it out. The Nibinabe had awakened their city, and in doing so, had effectively cloaked it, shielding it from human detection. The storm of silence and shadow from the legends had descended. The city and its inhabitants had vanished. Leo looked at Sam, a profound understanding passing between them. They had witnessed something truly extraordinary, something that challenged everything they thought they knew about the world and its history. They had made contact, however brief and unintentional, with an ancient, intelligent species that had chosen to remain hidden. Agent Thorne handed each of them a non-disclosure agreement, thicker than any document they had ever seen. The implications were clear. Their silence was now mandatory. As they were released, with stern warnings and the lingering feeling of being watched, they knew their lives would never be the same. They returned to the wreck finder, which had been inexplicably returned to its mooring. The lake looked calm and innocent, its surface shimmering under the afternoon sun, giving no hint of the wonders and mysteries hidden beneath its waves. They never spoke publicly about what they found. Who would believe them? They were just two shipwreck hunters who had stumbled upon a ghost. But in the quiet moments, especially when they were back on the water, they would look out at the vast expanse of Lake Michigan and remember the glowing city, the silent guardians, and the whispers of a past that was far more complex and wondrous than humanity had ever imagined. The city beneath the lake remained a secret, a testament to an ancient presence that chose to fade back into the depths, leaving humanity to its own shallow understanding of the world. And sometimes, when the lake was still and the silence profound, they could almost hear the faint, distant hum, a reminder that the deep held secrets far beyond human comprehension.